It was Meg's favorite.
There, Lois, stop your crying. Stop it. Please stop. Stop. Stop it. Stop crying. Stop crying. Stop crying. Stop.
A statement I always heard growing up was, boys don't cry. Like most people, I grew up internalizing this harmful idea that cis men or people assigned male at birth are not allowed to cry. I had male family members that I grew up with who were very sensitive and would cry when they were angry. I would watch their parents bark at them and shame them, sometimes in front of everybody, for crying. Stop acting like a little girl, I remember hearing from their dad. I would watch these boys be scolded as if they were a bad dog who had just gotten into the trash. Sometimes they would literally get whooped for crying, which would only make them cry more, but would still be told after their parent intentionally made them cry to stop crying. At a young age, I quickly absorbed this message that crying was not something that should ever continue. If you start, you must stop immediately. When I was younger, my sister and I used to go to my great aunt's house during the summer. To preface, this aunt wasn't nice, and honestly, I don't love calling women bitches, but she was a bitch. She hated kids, but would let kids stay at her house all the time. She was grouchy and would get mad over any little thing. I remember I was carrying a dish towel to the sink and she yelled at me because a few drops of water dripped on the floor. Water. One thing my aunt was good at, though, was making me feel ashamed for crying. And let me tell you, it did wonders for my mental health. Whenever I would cry, she would tell me to stop with all that crying or would tell me I needed to learn to be a big girl. Now, for context, I am a very sensitive person. It doesn't take a lot to make me cry. The ending of Titanic still sends a stream of tears down my face. Sometimes I can just think about something horrible that will probably never happen and it will make me cry. I can think back to something fucked up that happened to me in school and start crying. I am a human waterfall, and that has always been true for me. But it wasn't just my aunt who made me feel ashamed for this constant blubbering. It was my whole family. Because I was such a crier, I was always seen as the sensitive one. So whenever I'd cry, it was like you could just hear everyone groan and roll their eyes like, oh, Polia's crying again. See, when you cry a lot, people start to view you as like this fragile, broken bird, and they find your crying to be annoying. They think you're weak and that you can't handle anything. And they, who don't cry, are strong and confident, I guess, and don't let anything get to them. That was what I had internalized, at least. I remember fantasizing about having my tear ducts removed because I couldn't figure out how to not cry when my body wanted me to. I genuinely thought one day I will be a big girl. One day I will stop crying and be tough like everyone else. And while it's been 20 years, I am now 26 years old and my eyes haven't gotten any drier. I still cry as much, if not more, because of severe depression as I did when I was 5. I guess I didn't become a big girl. I guess I'm still weak and fragile. The reason I am talking about this is that while men definitely experience more shame and criticism for crying, I think the way our society responds to crying is flawed as a whole. It is so normalized in our culture to instantly tell someone who has begun crying to stop. Just stop feeling those emotions that are trying to come out. It makes people uncomfortable. Because that's really what it all boils down to. People being uncomfortable with someone's vulnerability. Listen, I have been to support groups. I have been around people who will share a sad story and start crying. And I will often feel myself start to tear up. Sometimes I cry with them. I'm not just a crier, I'm a sympathy crier. I feel when other people feel, and it causes an emotional reaction for me. So in that regard, I can see why someone may be a little uncomfortable seeing someone cry. They probably don't want to cry themselves. Crying is also messy. When you're crying, like really crying, it's not pretty. Your eyes get puffy, you're looking like Viola Davis in Fences, and you can barely speak and sometimes breathe. People don't like to see that. People don't like seeing someone's face alter into something unpleasant and sad. We make fun of people's crying faces and meme them. I think a lot of this comes from America's obsession with people lifting themselves up from their bootstrap and persevering through struggle. Seeing someone cry about their struggles isn't satisfying. We don't want to see people express their pain through tears unless, of course, it ends with them saying how this experience made them stronger. Now, for me, I did kind of feel that part of this shame I faced in my family possibly stemmed from this internalized idea that Black women have to always be strong and must never show any vulnerability ever. But after a few recent interactions with my family, I realized it's more than that. My mom never shamed me for crying in the harsh and cruel way my great aunt did or my grandma did, but my mom has never been someone who has embraced crying. Whenever I've cried, she never said, "Let it out, feel those feelings." Instead, she would try her best to remind me that everything was going to be fine. and to stop crying because everything was going to be fine. Now, I don't hate my mom for this or anything. Her heart was in the right place. It hurts her to see me hurt, and she just wants me to know that there's nothing to cry about. But there is. Unless you are an actor or something, most of us have no control over when we cry or why we cry. Like, I cry so much that I wish I did have control over that shit, but I fucking don't. We cry for a myriad of reasons, but the only reason that garners so much discomfort is emotional crying. And it doesn't make sense. You can't control your crying over something sad any more than you can when it's 0 degrees outside and you're freezing. The tears gonna come if they want to come. There's also this thing called Pseudobulbar affect, which in simple terms is emotional incontinence. As in, you in the most literal sense have very little control over when you laugh or cry or how much you laugh or cry. I find it disturbing that we live in a society that normalizes this idea that people should suck back their tears and bottle up their emotions. Years of constantly being shamed for crying did not make me a big girl. It didn't make me tougher. You know what it did? It made me isolate. It made me not want to be around people when I was depressed. To this day, I still feel a great deal of shame and embarrassment when I cry in front of people, even in front of people who I know wouldn't shame me for it. That shame is still stuck in the back of my head, and that's not fair. I shouldn't have been made to feel ashamed just because it irritated other people. I was having a natural, normal human emotion. I should have been comforted, not made to feel worse. Recently, my grandma told me that it's better to cry alone and not make other people upset with your feelings. She literally said that. I'm hardly paraphrasing. It was this conversation that made me want to make this video. When she said that, it clicked for me. Crying is bad because it makes other people feel bad. My mom told me the reason that she doesn't like to cry is because when you cry in front of other people, they think they can take advantage of that. Sadly, this can be true. Some people are fucked up and will notice that someone is sensitive and try to prey upon that. But that's an issue with them, not the sensitive person crying. To repeat, crying is a normal, natural human emotion, like being happy or angry. People's responses to crying is what isn't normal and is what we should be directing our shame towards. I'm not saying if you have kids and you've told them to stop crying that you are automatically a terrible parent. I always think of my mom. I know she wasn't telling me those things out of malice. She thought she was helping. But here's the thing. Even when you think you're helping, you might be doing the opposite. If you see someone crying and you have a visceral response to it, ask yourself why. Why am I having this reaction? Why is it making me uncomfortable? Is it that person's fault? I found this Reddit post that essentially lays out what I am trying to say here. One thing they said that I wholeheartedly agree with is when you tell someone to stop crying, you're actually suppressing their feelings. I want you to ask yourself, is that something you want to do? For any of you watching who are criers like me and also dealt with shame because of it, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you were made to feel that way. You shouldn't have been. And I want you to know that you don't need to learn to cry less. You don't need to become tougher. I'm not saying crying frequently can't be a sign of other underlying issues. It obviously is for me. I have a lot of trauma and struggle with severe depression. But that's my thing. If that is part of why you cry, why is that bad again? That doesn't mean you shouldn't get help, but it also doesn't mean you shouldn't cry. It also doesn't make you weak. Confronting our feelings and giving them appropriate expression always takes strength, not weakness. It takes strength to acknowledge our anger and sometimes more strength yet to curb the aggressive urges anger may bring and to channel them into nonviolent outlets. It takes strength to face our sadness and to grieve and to let our grief and our anger flow in tears when they need to. It takes strength to talk about our feelings and to reach out for help and comfort when we need it. I find it so interesting that I actually grew up believing that people who never cry or are always judging people who do are so strong and brave. I actually aspire to be like those people. I'm starting to understand now that my sensitivity is a gift. It's a huge part of why I am the way I am, why empathizing with people and their emotions has always come so naturally to me. So even though I am still unpacking that shame, I'm not apologizing for it anymore. Apologizing when you cry, I feel, is such a woman thing. Women always say, I'm sorry, when they cry in front of other people. We're apologizing because we're sorry that we put someone else in a situation where they have to deal with us crying. We're apologizing because we've let ourselves go on the crying train. We're apologizing because we've possibly made someone else sad. I can't tell you how many times I would cry in the school bathroom and someone would come in and I would, with lightning speed, wipe those tears away and be like, I'm fine, if they ask me what's wrong. That is a behavior that is so normal in our society that we don't even think twice about it. And you know, we should at least think thrice about it, We should think about it a little more because that's weird and it's not right. All right, that's all I got to say. In conclusion, don't shame people for crying, comfort them. And if this video made you cry, I'm not sorry for that either. You probably needed to.
Okay, you know what? Don't none of you look at them tears and think that is funny. Because it takes a big man to cry in front of his crew.